Hello, you're listening to Future Artifacts FM, a radio show hosted by Neve Schmidtke and Nina Davies.
Earlier this year, several radio frequencies were discovered airing a collection of broadcasts. At first, they sounded like regular news stories and interviews. They felt familiar, but also not quite belonging to our present. Slowly, the listeners came to believe that what they were listening to did indeed belong to their world, just not their time. They were looking into the future through the mundane edges of radio recordings and public service announcements. While this material is still being meticulously studied by researchers in various universities and museums, your hosts have managed to gain access to this collection to air a selection of these broadcasts for you, our listeners.
For full disclosure, we will not be sharing this collection with you, as this introduction is based on a fictional event. In this monthly broadcast, Future Artifacts FM, we will present speculative fiction pieces by artists and writers, followed by conversation with hosts Neve Schmidtke and Nina Davies. The programme will focus on fictional works intended for broadcast, such as radio plays or fictional interviews, to carve out a better understanding of the now by exploring various interpretations of the future.
Welcome back to Future Artifacts, episode 7. Yay! We're really excited to announce that this is our first episode that is kindly supported by the Arts Council Lottery Fund and as well as
The Elephant Trust.
So this is very exciting. And today we are going to be joined by Akinsola Lawanson, who is a British-Nigerian multi-disciplinary artist based in London. Through different mediums such as moving image, video game engines, and motorized sculptures, their practice examines a variety of themes including relational systems, digital technologies, and process philosophy.
Thanks for joining us on the show, Akinsola.
Hello.
So the piece we're going to listen to today is called Bosode, and it's about 10 minutes long. It's an audio narrative. It's a very atmospheric piece, so we highly recommend you listen to this on headphones, as the audio tends to move from one side of the headset to the other. We're really excited to talk about this with Akinsola today. Before we start listening to the piece, is there anything you'd like us to know about the work?
Not necessarily. I think it's just get into it. And as Neve mentioned, it's best experienced with headphones.
Great. Well, we will see you on the other side. Enjoy the work.
Cool. See you back in 10.
Hello, storyteller.
How are you this evening?
Fine. And you?
I'm very well, thank you. Are you ready for an interesting tale about a girl who meets Orumila and Eshu?
Yes.
If you want to hear an interesting tale, clap your hands. Story.
How much for these shells, ma? My darling, 16 shells for 10. Only 16? It is too much. They're selling it for 60 for 10 in that shop. Then go there. This one is imported, fresh from Nigeria. Sorry, ma. 1 moment. Who are you?
I am Orumila, father of wisdom.
I remember this name. I remember my mum telling me a story about you and Eshu. Where are we?
We are at the main marketplace in the town of spirits.
Why did you bring me here?
You are guided by your destiny.
Huh? What are they selling?
Stories, memories, images of another time. The spirits of this town have become restless and in their loneliness have become insane. Divorced from their great dreams, these images keep their ashe alive. Through nostalgic images, their dreams of rejoining their families in the metaverse are kept alive.
The metaverse? I'm confused. Their spirits have families in the metaverse. Why don't they go? I have an Oculus they can borrow.
Long ago, I devised an algorithmic system of fiction to allow for all things living and dead to realize their destinies. Through this system, your ancestors traveled throughout the different towns. In the metaverse, they reflected on their past and created futures through mapping out bits of data, usually through stories, songs, and play. They traveled freely to form new communities in the other towns, the town of things and the metaverse, and live amongst the people of the town of things, usually in a bush near your human dwellings. They formed relationships with your people.
Then what happened?
Leibniz's explanation of binary arithmetic happened. Jesuit missionaries in China wrote about their experiences, which led Leibniz to reverse engineer techniques practiced through the divination process in the I Ching. Not long after, the interspaces were occupied by your current tech lords. Highly secure data centers were erected at the sites of the portals, using the Ashe to power their apps. The portals were hidden. Free travel was now something of the past. Borders erected. The towns now siloed. But some spirits were stuck in the metaverse. They were the minions of Eshu, the trickster. They now seek to cause confusion in the metaverse by reinforcing the binary structures that maintain it, or collapsing them at their will. Completely detached from the town of spirits, they work to destabilize the metaverse in hope of reconnecting to the town of spirits. The ancestors of your tech overlords attempted to corrupt all images that frightened them and delete the secrets they held.
Why don't the spirits try to form relationships with us again?
The spirits are lost because the town of things has forgotten how to chant our ancient songs. You have new images created for a new season, a new god, a new age.
I still don't understand. Why did you bring me here?
It is written that it will reconnect us to the metaverse and town of things by recharging our psychic portals. I have prepared a recipe for a charm. This charm will unite the town of spirits, town of things, and the metaverse into one entity. The portals will be opened, borders dissolved. All that live will travel freely between the towns. Use a shell to travel freely through the towns, using one Raspberry Pi, one red Ethernet cable, one crimson parrot feather, one power supply, one robotic arm, one moringa leaf. You will assemble this charm in the great bush in the town of things once you've returned.
Where will I find these things?
Let the shell guide you. Once you've made the charm, you must go to the shrine I've set out for you. Throw the palm nuts onto the tray. From there, you'll know what to do. Also, watch out for Eshu. He lurks at the crossroads in the interspaces. Safe journey.
To the town of things.
Are you following the orders of Baba Orumila?
How do you know? I thought you were quarreling.
The shell used to cross the trail. Three exist. First two, wild and one. The nature of a relationship is complicated.
It sure does sound that way.
Chaos can't exist without each other. Be on your way. Take this red feather. Continue your mission. But remember, there's always a choice. Baba Orumila believes that collapsing all the towns into one will bring peace. Spirits of the metaverse have been destroying and rebuilding the binary in different ways since the beginning. Worlds emerge from rubble each time. Let's reconstruct a new world from the rubble. But there are many paths to take. Paths are not static. Their dynamic links constantly changing. Submit to your action, and the path you desire will be placed in front of you.
Bosode, the audio played too. See the sweet story. Orumila chose Bosode for big mission. He said she should create a charm to destroy all the borders between the towns. Eshu met her in the interspaces and persuaded her to submit to her ashe. See big mission. Why was she chosen? Will she follow Orumila's commands? Which road will she take? Find out in the next production coming soon.
Welcome back. We hope you all enjoyed Akinsola Lawanson's amazing piece, Bosode. Before we kick into main questions, is there anything you want to tell us about what we've just listened to, or if there's any kind of introduction before we start probing a little bit more into some of the themes and research behind the work?
Not necessarily. Basically, this audio piece is kind of an extension of a film I made last summer. And I kind of wanted to expand on the conversation between Orumila and Bosode within his audio piece. Mm-hmm. And so this is basically that.
Then the first question I'd like to ask is, the piece begins with the storyteller. Kind of, you have the call and response between the storyteller and the audience, the children. What kind of world is she inviting us into, or is she kind of setting up for us to enter?
So I kind of use this format with the storytelling, the audience, make this call and response, because there's this like odd TV show for children in Nigeria where a storyteller will begin to like narrate a story, and it's usually directed towards children. So I kind of use this format. This is how they usually introduce the play or the TV show. But the world is a strange kind of world with different towns or realms, and it's inspired by like early like Nollywood horror and magical realist literature in Nigeria, mostly one author, Amos Tutuola. It's a strange world where you meet different spirits. You go into the town of spirits. You can hear the spirits sort of chattering and moving in the marketplace. So it's a weird world.
The sort of town of spirits is just like, I think, had such strong visual imagery for me. And the first thing I thought about was Spirited Away. It's just so like, I don't know, there's something about like that marketplace of spirits that I just...
Yeah, I think it was interesting because the story starts with Bosode at the market trying to buy some shells. And then she receives a phone call, and then she's transported to the marketplace in the town of spirits. So kind of showing that these spaces are kind of, within this story, they kind of collapse, and all these different towns or realms kind of collapse into one, and she's able to move through them freely with the help of Orumila, the deity. Yeah, Spirited Way is an interesting reference. I guess there are some similarities in that, yeah.
The town that she gets transported to, is it kind of almost meant to be like a parallel world?
Yes. I use the language of town as a reference to Amos Tutuola's book, My Life in the Bishop Ghosts. This is an interesting book where there's a boy who's escaping a conflict, and he runs into the bush, and then he is on this quest to find his brother, and he encounters different sort of entities or ghosts or spirits in different towns. These different towns were had like somewhat a different metaphysics or different sort of system or logic. So yeah, I kind of use this as a space with its own logic, and a town is almost a realm, a space, its own system of values or way of navigating.
Also, it makes me think of the Inside Out world in Stranger Things, like where they're like it's the exact same world, but they're like on the other side, like where that character gets like lost in on the other side, and you can hear him trying to like, is that where he like plays with the lights and the lights are flickering, but he's not actually there. He's like in the Inside Out version. That was something that definitely made me think about, of like, yeah, you kind of go into this town and it's like the spirit version of the real.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of in a weird way just like a lens in which you kind of move through the world, or kind of like a framework or a system of thinking that allows you to engage with the world, and that can allow you to kind of go through these different worlds. That makes sense. So engaging with the world, or a framework in which you kind of play within the spirit realm, there's another system or another logic that allows you to engage with another aspect of the same realm.
I think also that Bosode is the only person who can go between these worlds. For me, it's kind of interesting how she's set up as kind of like a heroine in the story, because when she's in the marketplace, we're in the human realm, and then she meets Orumila, and we're in the spirit world, and then when she goes between the two, then she meets another spirit and another deity. But all of these kind of, I guess, characters in this story can only remain in very specific spaces. They kind of can't move, but she can. Like, kind of, she's dialed into the spirit world, and then she's transported back out of it. And then she has the shell that will kind of help guide her between the two as well. I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent. It seems almost kind of strange or kind of lonely for her in a way that she's the only one who can experience kind of moving between these kind of different kinds of spaces.
Yes, and this is somewhat the main sort of quest that Orumila gives Bosode, is to essentially collapse these worlds or reopen the portal so that people can freely move between these worlds. So yeah, the logic is that, or the premise of it is that there was a time where people moved freely between these realms. There was an event that happened, Leibniz, which Leibniz is somewhat credited with the I don't know the right word to use here. Is it discovering or creating binary mathematics, which is, the kind of the foundation of, computation as we know it. And, this digital world is all based on, founded on this binary mathematics. And this existed in binary, divination systems across the world. So in the Middle East, within the I Ching, in China, and also I'm talking about the Yoruba divination system. So in this world, they kind of freely travel. They were able to kind of engage with this realm, because divination system, or the Yoruba divination system especially, was created by Orumila to allow humans to kind of engage or to talk to the gods or consult with the spiritual realm. So it was kind of like a portal, or allowed you to, gain knowledge from another world.
Just to reiterate, kind of Leibniz then was the mathematician who I guess was the first to publish, maybe is a good way to standardize it, about binary mathematics, which is what kind of, I guess in part is like from this era of enlightenment where everything gets separated out, and kind of, I guess you separate different forms of religion and spiritualism from the scientific or the technological, which I guess is what's so interesting about this piece is you bring them together, or you find the link where they're obviously so closely living with one another.
Do you think that this spirit world that you're sort of like working within or writing within, do you see that as having like a sort of binary relationship to the real world, or is it something that's more quantum?
Yeah, there's a relationship between a town of things and a town of spirits, where, they're codependent. They have this weird relationship. In this, I was kind of thinking of the town of things as a space where things exist, such as like a car, things are clearly defined. A car is a car, a dog's a dog. But in the town of spirits, things flow. The fundamental unit is almost the process or the link, as opposed to the node or the individual within the town of things. So this is how they relate. In the town of spirits, I'm thinking things move more like a field, on the way of a field. And in the town of things, it's more of like a particle. And there are these two worlds that exist, but they are kind of dependent on each other. Or there's a relationship or link there. But this is how I've kind of understood these two different worlds within this story.
Yeah, I guess what I'm kind of hearing from that is that in one world, kind of everything is very clearly defined. It has its edges and its kind of boundaries almost, whereas in the other, things kind of slip between and are not one thing at the same time, but are multiple things at the same time. Kind of like the dog is the dog, but it's also related to the floor maybe that it's standing on. It's also related to maybe another dog in the room. And it's kind of like the interconnections between things is much more a part of what it is, as well as maybe the thing in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly this.
I guess there's something about the world that you've created. One would assume that this kind of spirit world is something like super mystical and even also like mysterious. But actually some of the things that you bring into the story are things that feel very present and very now. And I was quite interested at how you kind of separate these two worlds. But this other world feels very much like our online, is our sort of online reality. And so suddenly that idea of this mystical place suddenly is like, oh, I'm actually like, when I was first listening to your work, I was on my phone and I was probably like looking through my emails. I was probably looking through my emails while I was listening to it the first time. And I'm like, oh, I'm actually like in that space. I'm already kind of in that space that you're describing, which I thought was quite nice to play around with that, I guess. Describing that online space as this sort of as a spirit world.
Yeah, just in a state of flux.
In the story, you've got the you use the word ashi.
Yes.
Yeah. I was wondering. I was just kind of curious because I was listening to it again on my way here, and I was wondering whether you could describe. Like, I was sort of assuming that ashi is a sort of energy.
Yeah. From my understanding, within Yoruba sort of culture, religion, or Ifa religion, it's the will or the power to act. It's the potential that an entity possesses to have an influence on its environment. This is how I kind of understood it, or how I have used it.
Seems like it operates independently or autonomously from your understanding of yourself. So like I can't remember if it's Eshu or maybe it's Orumila that's like let it guide you. So it's like something that's not, I guess, sort of like in your direct consciousness. I almost read it as almost like a gut feeling.
Yeah, it's just like a presence that exists within you, like an energy within you. For me, yeah, I've just defined it as like the power or will to do something. This is how I imagine it.
Which kind of is quite interesting in the relation to this story, because at the beginning of it, when Bosode is first kind of transported to the spirit world, it makes it seem like she doesn't have a choice, or kind of she's just told by Orumila, like, this is what you must do. You must collapse these worlds so that the spirits cannot be trapped. But then as she's traveling between, she meets Eshu, and it's kind of like, why do you think Orumila is telling you this? Kind of consider what you're being asked and what this might cause. So it's kind of like the power to act. She's kind of been given the choice by, like, I think we were speaking before that, like, Eshu was kind of like considered a trickster, almost in a way. Can you speak a little bit about that kind of power to like wield choice, perhaps? Or
for that, I think it would be best to kind of explain the two deities or talk about the two deities. So the first, Orumila, is the deity of wisdom, knowledge, and divination. So Orumila is credited as the person who founded the Ifa religion. The Ifa religion is the religion that is practiced by Yoruba-speaking people, whether it's in Western Nigeria or Cuba or Brazil. Orumila is credited as creating this sort of divination system. And yeah, this divination system was kind of created to allow for, earthly beings like us to kind of communicate to the spiritual world or the spiritual realms. This divination system has like a very simple logic, not simple logic, but uses the binary mathematics, as I was talking about, where the process of divination is that you kind of would speak to a babalawo or ifanyawo, which essentially means father or mother or keeper of secrets. You consult them with either, you have a question you need to ask, or, there are some points you need to kind of reflect on. And then after this, you throw a cowrie shell or palm nuts. They will then interpret this reading, and there are 256 possibilities, through, this act. They will then sing a verse from the Oduifa. The Oduifa is a collection of texts, or 256 different Odus or verses that have to be remembered by the Babalawos or Ifinyawos. It's all orally sort of passed down. So each time Babalawo or Ifinyawo was trained, they will have to remember all 256 verses. These 256 possibilities kind of account for all potential eventualities that could happen to a human. And then Eshu is, as you said, usually known as a trickster, and also a messenger between the earthly and heavenly realms, and the guardian of crossroads. And Eshu, usually within the stories, Eshu always gives human beings a choice, or likes to present them with a choice. And as the crossroads is an interesting concept within this, because Eshu tends to lurk in the middle of a crossroad. So, for instance, when Bosode is traveling back from the spirit world, and she meets Eshu, she meets him at the crossroad, and this is the point at which he kind of makes her think about this sort of mission or this quest she's been given. And I thought these two characters played off each other well, because I feel like Orumila and his 256 possibilities, even though the process to achieve one of these possibilities or outcomes is quite random, you're just throwing cowrie shells or nuts, and then this will correlate to a number, and then you read out a verse. So there is this, probabilistic element to it. It also has like a weird deterministic vibe. And in one part of the story, he's talking about her destiny, and this is her destiny to kind of collapse these worlds. But then Eshu always allows people to kind of see multiple sides to a story, and kind of, gives an individual's choice. Because at the crossroads, I feel like this is a space where, everything kind of collapses.
It's like a threshold. It's kind of, you can be here and you're not really anywhere.
Yeah, you're in between like sort of spaces, binaries, like, good and evil doesn't exist at a crossroad, or humanity and divinity. You haven't quite made this decision, so you're kind of stuck in this sort of space.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask, because I guess we're kind of left at the moment after Bosode's interaction with Eshu, and she's left with this choice of what she's going to do. The open ending of this kind of sequence of this narrative, it kind of, to me, it makes it feel like the introduction sequence of a game. It's like you've been given a quest, you have this powerful figure who's kind of speaking to you. We're introduced to that quest. Bosode's given a set of tools to navigate the spirit world. Do you know what happens next in this world, or do you know kind of what parts of this world that we're going to be, if there's kind of part 2, part 3, whatever, that you want to explore?
Yes, funny enough, like it's kind of funny you mentioned the game aspect, because I started thinking through all these concepts when I wanted to make a video game, and it ended up being an interactive film where you can choose one of the endings. With this audio piece, I kind of wanted to center it more around the conversation between Orumila and Bosode, and expand more on Eshu's role within this sort of world. But within the film, there are 3 endings, and this is something I would like to explore a bit more. So within the 3 endings, without ruining the film, there are 3 endings. One where it's a bit daft, but one, and there's 3 endings because of the crossroads. But one ending where she kind of follows through with Orumila's quest, and she collapses these worlds, creates this object, and creates the charm that would collapse these worlds. The other is that she chooses not to. And then there's another where she's kind of stuck in the middle of the crossroads, or stuck in this place where the possibilities are constantly there. So these are the 3 different worlds, or 3 different sort of endings.
The character of Eshu is so just totally makes sense with a video game. Like there's even like this sort of like lingering at the crossroads. Like when you play video games and it's like you're on a specific quest, and then you're like, oh, I think I need to talk to that person, and then they have like a whole nother quest within them, and you're like playing the game, you're like, do I have time to take on this quest, like this second quest, like put it in my back pocket? Did you think that, these characters or these deities would just totally make sense in a video game? Like sort of what came first? Was it the idea to do this video game and then use these characters, or were you inspired by these characters?
At first, I just wanted to make a video game with a daft quest. I've always kind of wanted to do this, just like a hero's quest or hero's journey. So this is what I was thinking through.
Because the film is quite fun. Like the audio in the film, like it's kind of interesting hearing the audio compared to the film, because in the film it seems kind of light in a way. It's like sort of early internet 90s graphics. And then when you listen to the audio, it's like, ooh, there's like this big, powerful overlord who's asking me to do this thing. Like, oh crap, what happens if I don't do it? It's quite, I can see where it started from. It feels like it's progressively getting more serious, maybe, or darker in a way, as the layers kind of peel.
Yeah, definitely. And initially, I just kind of wanted to it was meant to be an interactive, fun film, kind of tying together all these concepts. And there were aspects within that film that I kind of wanted to double down on. So the Nollywood horror aspect, I kind of wanted to play a bit more with this in this audio piece. So that's an aspect from the film I kind of want to double down on. But the film is quite playful, and I was kind of using like early electronic music or early music made from computers. And this was quite fun and playful. So I just kind of created an atmosphere, and I wanted it to be quite playful and fun and easy to watch. I didn't want it to be too serious, but with this play, as I'm kind of trying to expand more on the conversation between Orumila and Eshu, I kind of wanted to kind of take this world a bit more seriously within this, and actually communicate more of the concepts behind it. Because the other one, I kind of lightly played with these concepts, and the narrative was there, but it was mostly a playful thing to watch.
We were talking before about your relationship watching Nollywood films growing up and how your relationship to these stories have changed from being quite fairly dark stories or to something else. And I was wondering whether maybe you could talk a bit about that, or I can just explain now.
Yeah. This is interesting for me because kind of living in Lagos or doing my high school in Lagos and then like watching Nollywood. You know, my grandma always had like the TV on and there was always some weird Nollywood film playing in the background. And I was absolutely like terrified of anything to do with traditional religion. Like a lot of it was, you know, strange stories about, you know, someone or a ritualist turning someone into a piece of yam. And I was 11 and I was like, okay, this is not something I'm going to play around with or engage with. And I feel a lot of this stems from like Christianity and colonialism and like early missionaries kind of converting lots of these deities into like weird characters. So for instance, Eshu, he was a trickster, he was playful, was considered the devil.
Right.
And this is quite, I think this is one of the fundamental sort of techniques Christianity used all across the world, converting folk heroes or different characters who are complex into, you know, simplifying them into like one-dimensional characters.
Yeah, good and evil.
Yeah, good and evil.
Yeah, I guess putting them back into the binary again.
Yeah. Whereas like Eshu did do some weird things, but also allowed you to see another world and would give you fortune, it could give you misfortune or some fortune. So I feel like this kind of flattened this image.
I guess then a question I have, because we spoke about this before we're speaking partially about how like Ifa and religion practiced by Yoruba speaking people has kind of coexists with Christianity, or how they kind of like mingle with one another. But then the other question I have is kind of how like Ifa and these deities are able to kind of exist in like a contemporary world, like a world that's speaking about binary mathematics and it's speaking about metaphysics, and kind of one of the tools Bosode has is a Raspberry Pi. What's your interest in maybe like bringing Ifa religion into a contemporary world?
Like as I mentioned, a lot of the lot of the references I have are like magical realist literature in Nigeria. One famous author is Amos Tutuola. There's a series of like many books, short stories and novels. And he was, you know, magical realist author raised in colonial Nigeria. And he kind of understood the role that like modernization, in quotes, was having on traditional sort of religion and just ways of being. I think he grew up in a world where his name was anglicized. His grandfather was like a Yoruba priest or chief, but then his father was Christian pastor. So he saw this change within his family, change within his society. Even my name, Lawanson, this has been anglicized, and there was this like movement or like, you know, move to kind of, to succeed within colonial Nigeria, you may have to, you would have to anglicize and align yourself more with, you know, quote, British values or Christian values. So I thought Amos Tutuola kind of was in this world and saw this kind of changing. And within his work, he, as much as you read it and it's, you know, this crazy tale of a boy turning in from a cow to a chicken to, you know, it's a bit nuts. But then within this, he's embedding a lot of Yoruba sort of rituals, practices, like the deities. They were characters, or a lot of the characters were inspired by, Ifa religion. And this was something I thought was interesting to do. Or I wanted to do something similar. Then I chose Orumila and Eshu, because I thought they were two interesting characters and that kind of communicated something about Yoruba religion. And a lot of this is also a kind of like a personal journey, because as I mentioned before, I was completely scared to bits by like Yoruba religion or Ifa religion, but it's only maybe recently, the past few years, where I've kind of started reading more literature, more like a text from like different writers or philosophers, one of which is Sophie Oluwole. She was a Nigerian philosopher who kind of talked a lot about Ifa religion and Yoruba religion and all the different dimensions that existed within this. So yeah, there's like text and text about her and like interviews she's given where she's saying Ifa contains so many different dimensions. There's the mathematics, there's medicine, there's physics. There's all these different dimensions to Ifa, and one can't reduce it to just like fetish or like juju. Someone turning into a piece of yam. There's so many other dimensions to it. And this was something I was kind of sparked my interest. And I kind of wanted to create a story that kind of talked about this or kind of included this. And I didn't want it to be, with the first film, I wanted it to be just a story that kind of makes these characters commonplace. Just as within culture. So for instance, like Zeus, you think of Zeus, you don't think of all the weird fetish and all the sacrifices, but you just think of the morals and the stories that this character kind of imbued. And this is what I wanted to do with Orumila and Eshu, kind of create them as,
sort of like recomplicate them. Take them outside of that like binary understanding of good and evil and let them sort of be what they are. I was going to ask as well, these stories that you've been looking at, are they written in a specific style? Like, are they meant to be children's stories? Because going back to the beginning of your story, where there's a storyteller teaching children, or are they in a different format?
A lot of these were children's stories. A lot of the literature I was inspired by are like children's stories. Amos Tutuola, he was famous for writing in like broken English, and it was from the perspective of a 9-year-old. So it's like a teen novel. This is other author, Tomi Adeyemi. She's a contemporary writer. She writes like Nigerian fantasy, or she's American Nigerian. She writes a lot of fantasy using, Yoruba sort of religion as the backdrop for the different characters. So I was very much influenced. A lot of the literature I was reading at the time was teen and child literature, and lots of the stories were like folk stories that would be told over a campfire. I don't know if in the first scene you could hear like fire crackling. So this was kind of playing into this like a story told at night to children. I wanted to kind of make or use this sort of make a children's story, or use this sort of framework to kind of introduce these characters.
Yeah, but it's kind of you're taking it out of the colonial gaze, so that, as you're saying, we can see all the complexity of these characters in the story. Kind of, how Eshu is the trickster that makes you think. Is like sitting at the crossroads. How Orumila has this kind of, I guess, godlike presence, but is really just one. It's like just one of the deities who's kind of circling around with many others, which kind of for me is part of why I enjoyed like this story so much, is that everyone is very much kind of this multi-dimensional and multi-layered character. Kind of the only person we don't really know much about is Bosode. Kind of we just know that she's at the market, she's buying these things, and then she gets transported. I mean, I guess one thing I'm kind of curious about, because you started by talking about Nollywood horror, which has this kind of very specific aesthetic of kind of super dramatic, almost, I guess, from my eyes, like almost like an overacted appearance. As you were saying, kind of makes this space with these deities or something to be very like scared of. Do you still feel, after all of this kind of research and reading and kind of recontextualizing in your own mind about kind of Orumila and Eshu, do you feel kind of superstitious or scared of them still? Or
I've always been, and I always will be. I think once it's put in your mind as a child, it never leaves. And depending on the region you're from, and I can only speak from a particular part because I lived in Lagos and I'm Yoruba, but it's very much part of the psyche. Whether you are Christian or you practice another religion or you're atheist, this has an influence on your life, whether you want it to or not. Yeah, reading about this made me a lot less superstitious, or a lot less scared, and more like intrigued to understand the sort of processes and divination process. Because before, I wouldn't have picked up a book about divination because I think this is a bit too spooky. I don't enter this realm. But now, at least, I'm a bit more curious about.
You told us a story about your mom, sort of mentioning that she's still afraid.
When I made this film, my mum was saying that I should be careful with the forces I'm delving into. My mum is Christian.
That's so powerful. That's so powerful and so scary.
But they're powerful. They're powerful characters. Like having someone summon you and give you a quest. Like even the voice that you have, that like it's this like deep booming voice that you hear. They're not like light characters in any way.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like my mum's attitude, as I was mentioning, I think it stems from this kind of demonization of Ifa. And through discussing with her and kind of discussing all the sort of the different aspects to Ifa, it was kind of interesting having this discussion with my mum, because she was kind of raised in somewhat of a British institution in Nigeria. One of the public schools, or the public schools were set up by the colonial government. So King's College and Queen's College, these are two like famous schools. And I feel like a lot of her knowledge is quite similar to mine, where she has heard odd stories of people doing rituals, and
she sort of grew up to fear these things.
Yes.
As well, yeah.
Yes. On the face of it, yes, but then still has interesting sort of ways of dealing with spirituality, which I feel are still rooted within the sort of practice. She's Christian, but then occasionally I feel like these boundaries are not a bit more fluid than they make out to be.
Well, you're still learning within the context of these stories, whether the stories have been changed. They're still the characters are still there. As you were saying, like with Christianity, they've adopted these characters. They might have turned them into good and evil, but these stories are still like underlying.
Yes, and I feel this religion is so embedded within culture, and just kind of psyche and like the sort of spirit of, like, it's hard to kind of separate these things.
So then, I guess because we're nearing the end of the conversation, one thing that for me keeps on coming up again and again, as we were speaking with you before and as we're speaking now, is the piece kind of explores different understandings of binaries. And you sent us on a really great video by Sophie Adewale, where kind of she speaks about how different binaries exist in Ifa religion, and I guess relating that to like a Western European form of enlightenment. I guess I'm wondering kind of how this has come up in your research when preparing for this work, or kind of how you see maybe these different kinds of binaries existing in this piece itself.
So the binary was important for different reasons, one of which is that the binary mathematics was interesting, understanding that this is kind of the basis of our computational world, and this was something that was very interesting to me, and understanding that this was also used as part of different religious practices across the world.
I think for me, the thing that really struck out, like in Sophie Adewale was saying, was she was speaking about the binary as the front and the back of the hand, and how one can never exist without another. You sent us as part of the script for this piece where it's kind of order cannot exist without chaos, or chaos cannot exist without order. It's kind of how the two have to sit alongside one another, which I guess also feels like Orumila and Eshu they're not opposites, as you were saying earlier, but they feel to me almost like the two sides of the same coin, where once you find one, the other's going to find you.
Yeah, exactly. This is something that was very interesting, and I kind of saw similarities between this and I know very little about this, but I saw similarities between this and like yin-yang sort of philosophy. And even within the I Ching, they have these similar logics. So it's kind of interesting how this frame of thinking can be connected to this binary mathematics, or this sort of divination process.
Yeah, because you sent us on a great paper that kind of used binary mathematics and coding and comparing it to the kind of 256 divinations in Ifa.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
I guess that part of kind of where the interest came from, kind of seeing how these two worlds are like kind of collided and or broken together.
Yeah, within this, I kind of wanted to see like for me, divination is, or especially the Yoruba divination, is somewhat a form of computation. And there are parallels to this beyond the binary mathematics. But I felt there's a strong relationship there, which I kind of wanted to play with. And I was kind of imagining, all the, the shell, because for divination process, you may need like either cowrie shells or the palm nuts. Then you have like a divination tray. And I wanted to see this as a form of computation that allows you to access the digital world or access another world. Just the same, your laptop allows you to kind of communicate to another sort of realm. I wanted to imagine this also as a
another
computer
version.
Of like a proto computer, of like a way of talking to the spiritual world. And I wanted to kind of imagine these worlds as being the same or similar, just a different flavor.
Yeah, so like computation to the spirits in a way.
Yeah, it's just
I'm way oversimplifying.
But also, when you were describing the divination process before, like you in Ifa, like you come with sort of questions about your life and these sort of verses. As you were explaining that before, I was thinking about that stuff. Like, I don't know whether you ever do it, but like type questions into Google, and like sometimes I don't know how to phrase this other than a question. I'm like, why does my foot hurt in this specific place or something like that? And then you kind of get this like information back, or like you do those kind of like tests of like, what, I'm so embarrassed, what Disney princess are you? Or like, and there does seem to be this sort of like, you kind of forget that we are like constantly asking questions to our computers all the time and getting this information back. I don't know whether there's 256 outcomes. I think there's probably more, but
I think Google can give you millions at certain points, but
infinite.
I think this is an interesting sort of analogy or thing to kind of reflect on.
We don't consider it to be a sort of spiritual practice of asking questions or just putting questions out there to not necessarily anyone. Like there's no physical person on the other side that we're asking these questions to. We just kind of throw them out there into the ether.
Yeah, into this like kind of crazy space with like 1,000 or million or billion responses, and you have to select one which is going to be appropriate for you.
Yeah.
And then like so you have like you kind of put a question out, or like you have something you're sort of reflecting on.
Well, I think about also like the I guess like the like tarot cards are like that's another form of divination, and how like there's infinite amount of ways that you can read the cards when they come down. It's the same thing as like I could look up like what are the health benefits of eating an apple every day, or I could also look up like why is eating an apple every day bad for you, and I like get answers. I'll get the answers that I want.
In a way, how you're speaking about how binary mathematics, kind of in the context of Ifa religion, so bringing spirituality and religion with technology, is reminding me in a way of the previous episode with Nina's last work, where we were talking about techno faith. And it feels like there's kind of this overwhelming desire to think of technology not purely as something which is kind of removed or separate, or also that's not a useful way to frame technology anymore. I mean, this is a massive question. I guess I'm wondering maybe where that desire comes from, or maybe if either of you have if you have like Akinsola, have like an ending kind of comment about that before you wrap.
Like, we are all increasingly understanding the world is complex, and it's really old ways of thinking and deducing don't quite make sense in a lot of cases. So there are, like, I feel a lot of people are turning or finding ways or trying to understand complex systems or engage with complex systems, because the world is complex. Like, the environment is a fundamental. There's an interesting example of this. Like technology, in like the way technology is approached in the West is like applied science, like engineering, or like, it's all applied science. You use...
So, science and technology are like quite a physical. We have a very physical understanding of what science and technology are.
Yeah, but it warps our world in ways we don't understand, and we have ways of thinking about unknowable things. And this religion has, kind of provided us with answers, or like ways of engaging with complexity. And I feel like, for me at least, I'm not saying that religion is going to solve any of our issues, but
I see where you're going with it. I guess it's kind of saying that the two are not separate.
Yeah, the two are not separate. To understand systems, we can't isolate this and say this is that. It always sits within a context. It always sits within a world. It always disrupts worlds in ways that we can't quite understand.
Well, I think we're going to have to finish here. Thank you so much, Akinsola, for coming in today and talking to us about your work and sharing your work as well.
Yeah, it's been really great having you on the show. Thank you for sharing so much about your research and also your own life history a bit as well.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun to kind of work on this, and yeah, hopefully everyone gets into it and just kind of enjoys it and lets them take them somewhere.
You can now also, for any more details and information about this radio show, Future Artifacts FM, you can follow us on our dedicated Instagram account.
Brand new, fresh in.
Which is futureartifacts.fm. We'll be having all of our information about current episodes, previous episodes, upcoming. We'll also keep you up to date on where artists are at. Thomas is going to have a really cool 3-day show happening in Harts Lane in New Cross, southeast London, which is going to be open from the
8th to the 10th.
8th to the 10th of April. So that's actually going to be on right now while you guys are listening. So do pop down if you're in the area.
Great.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.